Okay, Yevamos, Daf Recaps Yevamos. So I think the theme of today's daf is this concept of deficient chalitza. What does that mean? A normal chalitza is when I have the option, or when one has the option to either do yibum or do chalitza, and he chooses to do chalitza. He'd rather not go ahead with the marriage. A deficient chalitza is when you're unable to do yibum, and therefore you are sort of forced to do chalitza. You know, the examples or I think this was sort of brought up because of our Mishnah, which talked about we had 4 brothers. 2 of them were married to 2 sisters, and then those 2 brothers passed away. So now you have 2 sisters who are widows and 2 remaining brothers. The Mishnah says you can't do yibum on those 2 sisters. Why? Because they're each zakok for each other. So you have to do chalitza. So the fact that you are forced to do chalitza shows that it's a deficient chalitza. So today's daf begins with 3 statements by Shmuel about deficient chalitzas. The first thing he says is that in an instance where you have 2, let's say, if you do chalitza for 2, sorry, I'm blanking for a second. But in an instance where there are co-wives, let's say, I think the instance here is that there are 3 brothers, okay? 2 of them were married to 2 sisters, and those brothers died. The catch is that the widows had co-wives. So now there are really 4 women here that need to be, that are eligible, and 1 brother who's surviving. So we have this concept that says that when you do chalitza, it exempts not just, when a brother does chalitza, it's pretty much, it exempts him and all the other brothers. Basically, it like releases this woman completely. The question is, what about the co-wives? If the brother does chalitza on one of the widows, does it also exempt the widow's co-wife? So the first thing Shmuel says that when it comes to a deficient chalitza, if the remaining brother does chalitza on one of the wives, it does not exempt the tzara, the co-wife, meaning you have to then do chalitza on that co-wife as well. But the other way around, if you do chalitza on the co-wife, it does exempt the widow. That was the first thing that Shmuel said. The second din, they're all sort of on a similar theme, but in one instance that they're sisters. In the second case, it's not sisters, but we're dealing instead with an instance of a get, like a balas and get. If you do chalitza with a woman who was given a get, meaning they didn't do chalitza like they were supposed to, instead the brother just divorced her, Mar says a bit of a tricky situation because there was never really a marriage, so this existence of a get just complicates things. So you still have to do chalitza. But that makes it deficient chalitza, again, because you're sort of forced to do so, and you're not allowed to do yibum. And so, same applies. If you do chalitza for a balas aget, it does not exempt the co-wife. But if you do the co-wife, it does exempt the balas aget. And lastly, we say a mamar, which is someone who's like in the middle of the act of kiddushin, meaning it's like a light act of kiddushin. If someone is chalitza on a balas mamar, it does not exempt the co-wife. But if you do chalitza in the co-wife, it does exempt the get, the balas mamar. And the theme here for each of these is that if there's a deficient chalitza, it does not dissolve a superior case of zika, of zikuko, because the co-wife is still tied to the sister with a strong bond, and that's something that can't be dissolved because of a deficient chalitza. Those are 3 statements that Shmuel said. Sorry, it's a little bit tricky. The Gemara then goes to explain one of them, actually a few of them. First, by talking about the first case, right, where we have 2 sisters and co-wives, and the Gemara wants to know, okay, I understand why the sisters don't exempt the co-wives, but how do you explain why if I do chalitza on a co-wife, why does that exempt the sister? And what we ultimately say, actually I explained that a little bit wrong, but the Gemara wants to know why the sisters the tsaros are not pater when you do chalitza on the sisters. The Gemara thinks that they should be. So that's topic number one that we discussed. Number two is just sort of like a hypothetical situation, but let's say there are two sisters who are widows. One of them is a balas haget, meaning she was given a get but not yibam. The other one is a balas mamar. So which one do you do chalitza on first? Is there some sort of priority? We end up by saying there's no real priority there. Then the next thing we talk about is two sisters-in-law, who fell to one brother. That was the case we were saying before. There are three brothers, two of them married two sisters, and they die. The brothers die, so now there's one surviving brother and two sisters-in-law. So we have a machlokas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav says if the first widow dies, then the surviving brother can marry the second, and if the second widow dies, then the surviving brother can marry the first. Rabbi Yochanan, however, says if the first widow dies, the brother cannot marry the second widow. Why? Because this concept that once something is forbidden, meaning the second widow was forbidden to the brother because they're sisters. So even though the sister dies, that never fully dissolves. So he's unable to do even with her, to do chalitza with her. Yibam. They're unable. He's also to do yibam. And so that's sort of a machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosef Chanina just brings up, well, what about the case of our Mishnah where there are four brothers and two of them die? So now there are two sisters marrying two brothers. Like, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan in that case, why didn't he just bring up this scenario where maybe one of the brothers should do chalitza? Right? The Mishnah says that they cannot do yibam. Right? I said this at the beginning. They have to do chalitza. The question is, why do the two surviving brothers have to do chalitza on the two surviving sisters? Why don't you just do the following? One of the brothers will do chalitza, and that will exempt one of the two sisters. Okay, on widow number two, you should do chalitza on widow number two, and that means that widow number one, who was originally permitted because she was supposed to ibam, then she became prohibited when widow number two became a widow, and now we do chalitza on widow number two. Widow number one is back in business because she was originally permitted. So why doesn't the Mishnah just say that? Rabbi Yochanan says, listen, I don't know who the Mishnah was, but it's unreliable. And the remaining daf, including the beginning of tomorrow's daf, is like, well, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan answer this way? Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan answer that way? We end up disproving all those hypothetical what ifs, and we end up saying that's why Rabbi Yochanan had to say it. We don't know by the Mishnah. It's unreliable. And that concludes Yevamos Daf Recaps Yevamos.